Goblin Slayer is just a D&D game, and I'm gonna explain how Goblin's Crown, the Goblin Slayer movie, went down. Several months have passed since the finale of the last Goblin Slayer adventure. The GM and his group went on to play another, more traditional campaign. In the lead up to the grand finale, when they were about to fight a necromancer that was raising an army of undead dragons, Cindy, who originally played the elf archer in the Goblin Slaying adventure, caused a slight problem with their plans when she asked,
"Hey, can my cousin join us in our next game session? Her family's vacationing at our house."
The GM responded, "Sure, but I don't want to throw her into the climax of our big adventure. I'll write up a one-shot." John, Goblin Slayer himself, suggested,
"We could always just go back to slaying goblins. Then we wouldn't even have to make new characters, you know?"
The GM thought going back to goblin slaying was a very good idea. The next session began at Cindy's house. They started by getting her cousin, Anna, up to speed with the story. They explained how John, as Goblin Slayer, derailed their campaign and turned the whole adventure into just fighting goblins. How their original characters died in the first session, and how the campaign ended with the battle against the Goblin King. All of this took about 25 minutes. After that, the GM passed out pre-made character sheets to everyone there. John was once again late, so the rest played with Anna. Anna wanted to be leader of the party, which the GM allowed, but he warned her about it. "Are you sure you want to be the leader? It's not easy, and if your character dies, you have to make a new one." Anna replied,
"My personality test said I'm a commander, so I'll do great at being the leader."
The GM started by teaching Anna combat. He started them off fighting goblins in a snowstorm. She got the mechanics down well enough, and the DM gave her an incredibly powerful sword, so they defeated them quickly and continued the story. Sent to take care of goblins troubling a town, Anna, who is playing Nobel Fencer, leader of the party, begins by threatening the townspeople for supplies, stating that they won't take care of their goblin problem unless they're given a ton of food and building materials. She had a plan that she didn't bother getting anyone else's opinion on and wanted the extra supplies for it. So they journeyed to the Goblin Den. With no enemies guarding the entrance, Nobel Fencer tells everyone,
"Let's build a cage around it. We'll trap them in and wait until they come out for food. Then we can kill them without risk of dying."
Then they encamp beside it. Initially, everyone thinks this is a surprisingly good idea. They kill a few goblins that fall into the trap, but after that, a lot of time passes before any more show up. The more experienced players assume the goblins have a big food stash or something, and it would be better to just go exploring as the DM planned. But Anna refuses, declaring,
"We'll wait them out. They can't stay down there forever."
With their supplies diminishing, the GM explains they can't wait up there forever. The party that had been following her lead without question is starting to get annoyed with Anna, but she says,
"Let's send somebody back to the village for more supplies, and the rest can stay here."
At this moment, Cindy's mom came in and told Anna her mother needed her for something. Larry, who was getting bored, says,
"Let's have your character get the supplies while you're gone."
Anna says,
"Okay, that works."
and leaves. The GM's original plan was to have this party die or get captured in the dungeon, except for Anna, which is why he gave her such a powerful sword. And then the players could switch to the original Goblin Slayer party and rescue her. But with this development, he pivots to get the same outcome from a slightly different situation. He talks this through with the players for a few minutes, and everyone is okay with this idea, especially because they don't care about their pre-made characters and really just want to get back to playing in Goblin Slayer's party. He continued Anna's side of the story as soon as she returned. She got more supplies from the reluctant villagers and began the journey back. It was much more difficult than she had expected it to be, with multiple checks to see how she deals with the cold and rough terrain. With it getting dark enough that she couldn't see clearly where to go, she decided to camp for the night. But before she could sleep, a successful perception check meant she heard goblins surrounding her. Standing up ready to fight, Anna proceeded to fail every roll after the DM described the grisly sight as the goblins threw the heads of her companions at her feet. With a critical fail for her first attack, her sword hilt froze and she couldn't even draw it. The goblins knocked her out and Anna was not happy. The GM explained the goblins came out while she was gone and overwhelmed them. At this point, Anna learned rule number 1 of TTRPGs. Never split the party. At this point, John finally arrived, so the GM suggested to the still very upset Anna that she could see how the main group does things and then join back in with a better grasp of how the game works. Anna complains,
"I got attached to the noble girl. I don't want to make a new character."
The GM replied, "I never said she was dead." With the hope her character might still be alive, Anna observes the rest of the party. John, the Goblin Slayer, Lisa, the Priestess, Cindy, the Elf Archer, Larry, the Dwarf, and Richard, the Lizard Man, enter the village that Nobel Fencer and our party had been to previously. At this point, however, it has been overrun by goblins. The players work together to kill them, and because of their advanced level, they make short work of their enemies. Surprisingly, the goblins were taking hostages, so Larry used Stupor on the entire area to knock everyone out, so the others can just walk up and kill the goblins without risk of hurting the people. The GM started the encounter by stating there were 20 goblins, so John, being the kind of player he is, counted every kill they had. They only had 19, but no one got a good enough perception check to find the last goblin. John treats the villagers kindly, and offers to help with the wounded. He would have been nice either way, but he acts extra considerate because he heard about the way Anna had treated them. The GM makes his point extra clear by explaining how relieved the villagers are that they won't be further extorted, and the adventuring party is invited to eat what little food they have left. Before they could continue, they finally spotted the last goblin who was fleeing. Because it was just a one-shot, the GM had allowed the players to get a certain amount of supplies for free. John tells Cindy to use one of his poison arrows on the last goblin to make sure it doesn't escape. Cindy gets a bad roll and wings the goblin in the arm, but unfortunately, it doesn't do enough damage to kill him, and he gets away. However, Goblin Slayer just says,
That's perfect. Poison will rot his flesh. The fool will spread diseases to all. All I say, his goblin friends.
The GM just says, sure. Goblin Slayer continues.
I loosen the tip, so if he rips out the arrow, the poison metal would stay embedded in his arm.
Oh, that's why you mentioned that. The party rests for the night in the village and learns all they can about the goblin threat from the mayor. He tells them about Anna's group, and they assume her party might still be alive since the goblin took captives in the village as well. Goblin Slayer remarked,
She'd be alive either way. She's a woman.
Which made Anna further concerned about the fate of her character. They arrive at the Goblin Den and rest in front of it to restore lost stats from the journey through the harsh cold. Then they go through the underground passage to find the Goblin Nest. Nobel Fencer's barricade had been destroyed, but there weren't any signs of her or her party. They carefully make their way through the passages, avoiding traps and successfully noticing the goblins waiting in ambush. They get in position before Priestess uses her holy light to blind the goblins. With her support, the rest of the team quickly demolishes the threat. Once the effect wears off, Priestess uses it again, but it wasn't as effective this time. The last goblin gets a critical hit on Cindy, but Goblin Slayer finishes that one off right after. Cindy took a lot of damage. The GM describes that the arrow tip was lodged into her leg. The goblins had loosened it in the same way Goblin Slayer did to the poisoned arrow. With the arrow tip still in her leg, John decides to perform an impromptu surgery and gouge it out instead of leaving Cindy with a status effect.
I really don't like this idea.
It's either that or your leg dies and gets amputated.
Although the GM wasn't planning on making it such a dangerous injury, he mentions that amputation is possible, so they go through with John's plan. He gets a very good roll, so she loses all static effects, but is still very low on health. Going into the next room, they find a shrine with Nobel Fencer's naked body on it. Examining her, Priestess sees she's still alive, but also that she has a mark branded into the back of her neck. Piecing together what he's seen, John asks,
Is this the work of a goblin paladin?
After a successful intellect check, the GM responds, yes. They take Nobel Fencer and return to the village. Her equipment was conveniently lying beside her, but her overpowered sword was taken away by the goblins. With that, Anna rejoins the game, fully restored. She was happy her character didn't die, but out of game she also said,
I want my sword back.
While in the village, Cindy also recovers from her injury. The GM gives some lore about the paladin's god through Lisa's successful intelligence check, but Goblin Slayer being Goblin Slayer doesn't care and starts figuring out where the lair of the paladin is. They had completely cleared out the nest and found no clues as to where the main force is. The GM, through the mayor of the village, gives them a map. The only notable place nearby is an old dwarven ruins, so the players figure that must be where they are. The GM explains that Larry, being a dwarf, knows that with dwarven structures like this, it will be incredibly difficult to sneak inside. Because Priestess knows about their god and rituals, they decide to dress as cultists, and bring the female characters in a cage as an offering to hopefully meet with the Goblin Paladin, and then kill him. Nobel Fencer demands they let her join them, which they do because she's a player character, and then they journey to the ruins with Priestess, Elf Archer, Archer, and Nobel Fencer in a cage. The GM lets Goblin Slayer know that he has obtained rings that allow the user to breathe underwater, and that it would probably also help with the cold. John knew this was the GM hinting to something that he wanted to happen later, so he gave out the rings to the party. They journey to the mountains and find a gate to enter the ruined dwarven fortress. Richard had the best stats for diplomacy, so he calls out for the goblins to open the gate. He is successful, and the goblins fall for their disguises. Richard also has a telepathic communication miracle, which allows him to talk to the goblins. No one knew that he had so many diplomatic skills, and weren't sure why he got them considering the kind of game they were playing. But right now, they were glad he had them. Entering the fortress, they see a ton of goblins, which jeer at the prisoners but do nothing to the disguised players. They are led to a dungeon where they see other women who have been captured and abused, as they are brought to a cell. Everyone plays along as the goblin cleric who had invited them in chooses a sacrifice, but as soon as their cage is opened, Anna, who had been acting all depressed and angry in character because of the death of her party and how she was abused, lunges at the goblin and gets her role to strangle and beat him to death. Lisa tries to stop her but fails. Everyone else except John groans as Anna just ruined their plan. Goblin Slayer acted quickly, however, to salvage their mission and kills the other goblin in the room. John is not perturbed as he expected this to happen with the kind of player Anna was turning out to be. Nobel Fencer freaks out and continues to beat down the corpse of the goblin until Elf Archer pulls her off. Cindy is especially annoyed at her cousin.
You screwed up our whole plan.
This is what my character would do.
And my character's annoyed that you screwed up the plan.
John and Lisa help calm everyone down. The player's annoyance was both in character and out of character. They change back into their normal clothes since the disguises won't work anymore, and Priestess heals Nobel Fencer's hand, which got injured in the goblin skirmish.
So how are we gonna defeat the goblins now?
We'll take inspiration, Nobel Fencer. Starve them out. Burn their food supply.
They continue through the fortress looking for the food storage area, but instead find the armory. They loot it, and then Richard uses a prayer of decay, which destroys the rest of the weapons and tools.
Why did you choose these super specific abilities?
Things like this come up.
After this, the party hears a lot of commotion, as the goblins blow horns and bang on drums as they assemble in the courtyard. With this, the players sneak out to the rampart to watch from a distance. They watch Goblin Paladin walk through the crowd. Through John and Lisa's successful intelligence check, the GM describes, "While the goblins cheer as their paladin arrives and takes his place on the throne, Goblin Slayer and Priestess realize this is a goblin coronation, which needs a cleric to conduct the ceremony. Specifically, the goblin cleric who is dead in the dungeon. Anna, make a will saving throw." Anna fails her roll, and the GM brilliantly weaves the annoying way she had been playing her character with the story. The brand on the back of your neck starts to burn, as you recognize the Goblin Paladin and the powerful sword he wields. You have flashbacks of the goblin who had tortured and branded you for this very ceremony, the Goblin Paladin himself. You can't help but scream, alerting all the goblins to your presence. Lisa tries to use one of her healing abilities to prevent this, but it doesn't help. The goblins attack with a barrage of arrows. Then Anna realizes,
Wait, he has my sword.
Then Richard remembers,
There were prisoners in that dungeon. We need to help them escape.
I'll draw their fire. Go get the prisoners and then find their food supply.
Priestess stays with Goblin Slayer because she can use protection to block the arrows, and Nobel Fencer demands to stay with them because they're more likely to face the Goblin Paladin, and she wants to get her sword back. Goblin Slayer's group leads the goblins away and manages to kill all the enemies that were initially following them. Not wanting to disrupt the flow or make the game take too long for this one shot to be completed, the GM quickly glosses over the second party freeing the prisoners and says, "You managed to get them to a safe place." Then Lizardman, Elf Archer, and Dwarf finally find the goblin food storage room. They burn it as was the plan. Goblin Slayer's party delays the goblins' route to follow them, and plans to circle around to meet up with the others and escape. But as they make their way to the lower part of the wall, the Goblin Paladin blocks their path. Priestess and Nobel Fencer use their abilities to kill the regular goblins who came with the Paladin, while Goblin Slayer fights the main boss himself. This is when John realized the GM gave their enemy crazy high stats. With how John cheesed every powerful enemy he had thrown at them this far, the GM wanted to make an extremely difficult boss, so all the players would actually have to work together in order to kill this one. Goblin Slayer holds him off, getting lucky not to take damage, but never getting any successful attacks on his opponent either. With more goblins on their way, Priestess ties rope to the parapet. Goblin Slayer throws his sword at the paladin to distract him, while they all grab onto the rope and jump off the wall to escape. Surprisingly, all of them got successful rolls and rappelled down with no trouble. To keep the game moving along, the other group found a very convenient tunnel that led straight to where Goblin Slayer and the others ended up outside the wall. The GM explains, you know, goblins dig holes. So the players roll with it. Elf Archer shakes the snow off of her hair. She then tells Anna in character,
Well, it ended up working out. We did it.
to make sure she wasn't feeling bad about the whole situation. Dwarf gives Goblin Slayer one of the extra swords he took from the armory. The GM describes the epic scene of them standing in formation as the horde of goblins began to pour out from the front gate. The players run.
Wait, if we're running away, what happened to the prisoners? I wouldn't have left them to die.
The GM, regretting adding them into the story when they are already running short on time, says, right. They're still with you. Your Dragon-Tooth Warrior has been carrying them. He takes one, while his Dragon-Tooth Warrior carries the others, as they run down the snow-covered mountain. At one point, he fails his roll to keep pace with the others because of the extra weight, so Lisa and Nobel Fencer push him from behind to help. They fight some of the faster goblins who caught up to them, and Goblin Slayer manages to lose every extra weapon Larry had been keeping. They get to the bottom of the mountain, which leads to a valley. John says,
I've got a plan. Everyone, stay back.
Richard gives him one of his fabricated weapons, and he charges alone at the boss, while Elf Archer gives him range support. He fights the Goblin Paladin again and tricks him into stabbing his sword into Goblin Slayer's shield, which disarms him. Then John gets an extremely lucky critical hit. With Richard's very powerful fabricated weapon, it does enough damage to kill the boss in one hit, once again ruining the GM's plan for this whole party to join in the battle. Surprised at his luck, John has Nobel Fencer enact his plan because there's still a ton of goblins charging them. She uses her spell, targeting the mountain itself to cause an avalanche, and then Lisa uses protection to save them from it. John was sure this would work as he knew the GM very well and could tell he was hinting for them to cause an avalanche throughout the adventure. It was most obvious when they began running from the fortress, and he took the time to explain. The snow is deep and stagnant, while the decline of the mountain is steep. You have the slight worry it could all fall down on you, but causing only this much disruption, it seems to be safe. The avalanche is successful, but Goblin Slayer was too far away from Lisa to get behind her protection wall. He takes a ton of damage from the impact, but doesn't suffocate because of the underwater breathing rings. Everyone looks for him, but he digs his way out before any of their efforts are productive. With that, John asks,
This may not seem important to you, however, do I still have my shield?
The GM checks and says, Yes, you managed to hold on to all of your equipment. With that, he pulls the sword out of his shield and gives it to Nobel Fencer. She exclaims happily,
You got my sword back!
Although this meant nothing gameplay-wise for the rest of the session, emotionally, it meant a lot to Anna. She overdoes the acting and cries about getting her favorite sword back. Everyone else just laughs, and with that, the session ends. The GM gives a little extra time with everyone role-playing in the guild, as they like to do after a big adventure. Goblin Slayer, however, is keeping watch over the city. It's New Year's, exactly when the goblins like to strike. Lisa goes out to roleplay a final moment for the adventure. A big point of the story has been Goblin Slayer's development in depending more on his party members and becoming less cold to everyone around him. The GM knows this and sets this moment specifically for that. Priestess talks to him and makes food over a small fire in the cold, but it's Goblin Slayer who expresses his desire to continue adventuring with the party. Realizing now exactly how much they'd missed this adventure, the rest of the group agrees. Thank you so much for watching. Check out the first two parts of the series here on the end screen. If you want a Goblin Slayer is just a D&D game video for season 2, let me know in the comments and share this video with someone who'll like it. If you want to support me financially and get some bonus videos and other perks, become a member by hitting the join button after you subscribe. The first few people who sign up at any tier get a special bonus, so check it out now. That's all for me. Jamio.